Welcome to Beyond Distribution with GTDC with our host, Frank Vitagliano. Today, we are joined once again by David Grant, CEO of Westcon-Comstor, to discuss the trends reshaping technology distribution. David shares how Westcon-Comstor is evolving through software, lifecycle selling, and services-led growth, and what the company's recent investment means for its future. The conversation explores AI moving into production, cybersecurity, cloud marketplaces, hyperscaler relationships, and why David believes distribution is entering a new era of opportunity as vendors and partners navigate an increasingly complex technology landscape. Listen and enjoy.
Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Beyond Distribution. And I am delighted today to have with me David Grant, CEO of Westcon-Comstor. David, welcome.
Hi, Frank. It's great to be back, by the way. I think this is the 75th podcast, so congratulations on a great milestone.
It is. Thank you. And it's the second one you and I have done. We did one a couple of years back. In fact, it was at some event and the wind was blowing in the background and we were trying to concentrate on talking to each other at that point, I think.
Yeah, I think that's, but I have to say it was sun shining and outside. So those two things always preferable. But anyway, it's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, there's been clearly a lot that's happened since the last time, we've spoken on a podcast.
Yeah.
It'd be great for you to catch us up because one of the things I know that's very significant is that, you recently had some really good news regarding some incremental investments in Westcon-Comstor that I think are, folks should know about, right? Could you talk a little bit about that and what's happened there?
Yeah, so actually, really, since we last spoke in 23, we've continued to transition our business, more software, lifecycle selling, sales motions, and really, we've had a very significant shift in our financial performance, 7 consecutive years of growth. More recently, we've made 2 acquisitions, one of an AWS consulting specialist organization, and one of a cybersecurity specialist distributor in the Balkans in Eastern Europe. And I think really both good examples of our investment in what we see as high growth areas and the ones that really complement what we do. Of course, we continue to focus on the areas of specialization around networking, infrastructure, cybersecurity, cloud computing and services, and continue to really help our partners, the channel partners, and the vendors, but converting that level of complexity into scalable growth. And I think that our continued philosophy of investing ahead of the revenue curve makes us pretty unique with our vendor relationships, and that's leading to a significant amount of investment and support from our partners. But you're absolutely right. General Atlantic's investment in Westcon-Comstor is a real vote of confidence, and I think it gives us the best of so many different worlds in terms of, while the market is clearly very interested in always in private equity investment, what we have here is a third-party investor, a partner that has significant financial firepower behind it, that can really help us reach some of those additional goals as and when we choose to get there. They've taken a minority stake, as you said, so the benefit to us is that we have their involvement in our board, but of course we keep control of the business. We're continuing to work with Datatech, who we have been the owner of the business since its creation. So we have a really well-established working cadence with Jens and the team. So we've got the support, the firepower, we've got some minority investment. But most importantly, we continue to run the business as we need to continue that growth trajectory, but leveraging GA's global network of capital access when and if we need it. So so the leadership team and I and Datatech are delighted.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that I'm most impressed with distribution in general, and certainly with some of what you guys are doing, is the ability to run the business, do the things that have to be done on a day-to-day basis, the foundational things that distribution's always been really good at, and also, unfortunately, that the market seems to take advantage or kind of not take into consideration and give you enough credit for, but also to figure out from a strategic investment standpoint what needs and where the investment needs to be. And the fact that, you've got some capital to be able to look at that in
Yeah.
such a time when there is clearly a ton of opportunity out there is a good spot to be in, frankly.
Yeah, I think we absolutely agree. It's always a tough process running the business for today and looking at what you have to do tomorrow, the day job, but then to be going through a process at the same time puts an extra load on many of the members of the team. So we're glad we've got the outcome we have, and we're glad we can now focus 100% back on running the business and continuing to grow.
Yeah, that's great. So speaking of growth, one of the things that we're seeing, and as you know, we have, strong relationships with a lot of the market intelligence firms globally, Context and GfK in Europe and IDC in North America, is from the data reports that we get, which have been consistent for the last 15 years, we're seeing numbers that we haven't seen in quite some time. In terms of distribution growth. Just saw the June numbers come in, and they were also pretty significant, albeit slowing a bit. But year to date, up still about 9%. But the last month or two, it has slowed down. Interested in not necessarily, and you can talk about what you want relative to your business, but more interested in how do you see the market right now and what's happening and why are we seeing what we're seeing?
So, I think the market demand for compute and service and storage is well documented, along with the supply constraints of the chipsets and the price rises. So, I think that a lot of what you get from Context and IDC and GfK is all around that particular element. As you know, we are much more specialist in our segment. So if we then take what's happening in those technology stacks and apply it into our world, we are seeing significantly increased demand. I have to say that our June numbers don't give any suggestion that is abating, which is great news. And I think that we are sitting at a really important intersection of the technology stack. So what I think we see is that a lot of these AI projects are moving from pilot into production. That's driving new requirements not only around the data center, the storage and compute elements, but at the same time, it's driving infrastructure refresh requirements because of the data throughput and the connectivity requirements. That is also I think supported by the fact that from a geopolitical perspective, the level of uncertainty and disruption is at a level that I've never experienced, and yet governments and commercial organizations are even more focused on data sovereignty. So again, that means that the configuration of hybrid cloud type solutions is changing, giving rise to that whole infrastructure refresh. And then when you take all of that and consider with the geopolitical dimension and the rise of AI and the need for more data and a different type of access, the cybersecurity demand is enormous. So you have to contend with everything that I've just talked about in terms of new opportunity, combined with this increased velocity and ferocity of the AI-enabled cyber attack threat, and a substantially increased attack surface from an AI perspective. So if you take all of that, I think that the opportunity and increased demand in cyber and infrastructure is not just as significant as the other technology elements that I talked about right at the start, but when you consider the number of organizations that really do need to continue to invest in their infrastructure refresh and their cyber security requirements, so it's only a very small percentage of end user organizations that are truly investing in advanced cyber security. So those elements make the demand and the opportunity in the business significant, and you and I touched on this just before we started talking, Frank, that the rate of change, the speed of acceleration of the need for these solutions to be deployed is also increased dramatically. So the partners don't only just need help and support to look after the breadth and the sheer volume, but the value of those opportunities, but the rate at which the solutions are evolving, the rate at which the threats are increasing, the need for distribution to be able to step in and provide that, channel enablement. Enablement's a much overused word, but the ability to train and support, whether it's training the engineers, supplying the engineers, the design, the proof of concept type cloud solutions that we provide. So this is I think a real purple patch for distribution. But I don't think it's going to be short-lived. I don't think this is going to be something where in 2 quarters' time we're saying it was a wave that's passed. I think this is almost a new normal, certainly for the next few years.
Yeah, I see that, and obviously you see it in those numbers too, because one of the things that as I dug into the numbers a little bit recently, there has been a significant increase in this category called other services that distribution's reporting. And when you dig into it, other services tend to be the AI related services. And the reason they're in the other category is there hasn't been enough time yet to delineate exactly what they are, right? And so people kind of lump them into other services, but they were up in the last set of numbers I looked at 56%. And what you just described is a whole series of services that are a little bit different from the core business that people have known distribution to be in for all these years. And I think that's exciting. I mean, I think that's tremendous opportunity.
Well, if you consider that the acquisition we made 3 years ago now with Rebura, who are an AWS consulting organization, and originally the AWS consulting revenues were relatively limited, but what we believed and what has borne out to be the case is that actually increasingly the focus has been on AI readiness. And actually the area in the last 18 months that has increased most for our business has been focusing on making sure that they're supporting the partners and also the end user community in data readiness, because one of the largest inhibitors to deploying AI at scale in the end user community is the organizations just not having the right governance and control over their data and their data structures. So, everyone was getting excited when we were talking to them through the AWS consulting business about the AI deployments, but there's been a huge increase in the data consulting capability. And now, of course, we are starting to see a number of scaled deployments.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's exactly the trend that I've been seeing and hearing. And of course the infrastructure upgrades also become pretty significant, and that's where a lot of the cybersecurity stuff comes in. I mentioned to you that I had been in a conference not long ago with some VC folks, and that's all they see these days are cybersecurity companies and AI, sort of consultancy companies. And that's all interesting, but what those folks don't really have, and the VCs readily admit this, is they don't have the go-to-market expertise, which is where, you come in and where certainly the solution providers come in, right?
Yep. No, I think that's right. And Rebura works with both the end users and our channel partners. There is zero conflict, which of course is always a level of anxiety in distribution. But in fact, the fact that we work with end users for and on behalf of partners actually gives our partner community real reassurance that we are able to execute in the real world rather than just train and transfer knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. You're on an interesting point, and it leads to my next question that I was thinking about. You mentioned in AWS and the fact that you'd purchased a company that worked with them. But, since we talked in 2023, there's clearly been significant changes in the hyperscaler relationships, right? Because back then, and even before then, there was a lot of discussion about hyperscalers and competitive activity with the channel and disintermediation potentially with distribution, all of that. And what we've seen play out is exactly the opposite, I think, is that we've seen cooperation between distribution, solution providers, and the hyperscalers that has enabled, I think, opportunity for everybody. And what you just described earlier is a good example of that. Tell me what you think the environment looks like now and what's happening there.
So we started our marketplace journey and that vendor, the AWS relationship, looking at across all of our other vendors around their DSOR program. So, of course, the conundrum, I suppose, is, or the thesis was working with marketplaces to help unlock budget that would otherwise not necessarily be available, etc. So we work with AWS. We now work with Microsoft as well in their new program. I think that where the vendors and the partners still want to see a complete solutions lifecycle capability, the traditional model of engagement is still very compelling. From our experience, a transaction through the marketplace is really just that. It is much more of a simple transaction. Invariably, it is driven by the vendor wanting to get access to the budget. But in most cases, the vendor is losing control of a significant part of the immediate post-transaction opportunity with, there isn't anybody looking at the upsell, cross-sell. The renewal isn't necessarily managed very effectively, unless, of course, it's going through one of the programs that keeps distribution and the partners involved. And I think that's something that, from a vendor point of view, they are realizing that if they really want to make the most of their platform capability and in that solutions lifecycle, see the upsell, the cross-sell, and the expansion, then either it is through a traditional engagement model or it has to go through some kind of marketplace transaction that keeps distribution and the channel front and center of the business.
Yeah, totally. I couldn't agree more. The other discussion that we've had beyond the additional capability, and I just had this recently. In fact, I did an interview with publication in Europe, and the gentleman I spoke to kept talking about the hyperscalers and competitive environment, et cetera. And I said, well, you got to remember one thing about the hyperscalers. At the end of the day, they are a vendor. And you can't forget that. And therefore, they've got a set of customers that at some point in time, they may sell direct to. And that's the complete opposite of what happens with distribution, right? You'll partner with folks, as you mentioned, but there is a big distinction. And I think people have finally come around to realize that. And I think the programs that we're seeing with AWS and Microsoft and even Google recognize all of that, and the fact that it is an environment where you all complement each other pretty well. And that's the way I think the marketplace ought to work here.
And by the way, we also recognize that the marketplace, on the one hand, has given us some expanded opportunity, but it's also a competitive threat. And unless there's value that the distributor or the partner can add into the supply chain, then your right to be part of that supply chain is at risk. But those economic dynamics have been the same since day one. It's no different to an existing distribution vendor relationship where there's a potential one-tier engagement or a direct engagement.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting, David. I'm on the board of a small MSP here in the U.S. and $10 to $12 million pure play. And 5 or 6 years ago, when I joined the board, they had no relationship with distribution at all. Nobody. Every now and then they'd use a disty to procure some product, but nothing. That's totally changing now, because what's happening is their customers are saying, hey, I need, as they were trying to expand, I need help doing this. I need help doing that. I need help with, data, readiness, infrastructure, upgrades, et cetera. And all of a sudden, they're all interested in an expanded distribution relationship because they got no place else to go, right?
Yeah.
Who else is going to do it? And so the game is really changing, and for distributors, in my opinion, because the services, what we call services opportunities, are much more significant than what the old pick, pack, ship, and finance,
100%.
play was.
100%.
It's incredible. Well, David, we couldn't do this discussion. We couldn't have this discussion at this point in time without talking a little bit about the ongoing memory shortages and, what's happening in the marketplace and what you're seeing. So obviously, nobody's got a crystal ball, but talk a little bit about how you're managing through that and kind of what you're seeing there, as we continue through this pretty difficult period from that standpoint.
Yeah. So I think that we are fortunate, largely by design, but also just in a good place, that over 65% of our revenues are either recurring or software. So our dependency on hardware is invariably either part of infrastructure, which clearly continues to be still very hardware centric, acknowledged, or it's a device that's part of an installation for cybersecurity deployment. So from a personal perspective, we have some level of insulation from a revenue point of view, but in terms of supporting the partners, we are making sure that we are getting as much reassurance and forward ordering with the right levels of price protection as we can obtain. And if we can't get that, we are looking for all of the levels of flexibility and I think security that we are not going to end up with a product that's significantly more expensive than our partner and the end user is committed to. In holding the right level of inventory and making sure that is again price protected and avoiding the volatility are all of the normal elements. But in many cases, what we're also trying to do for our partners is driving in the cyber world and even in our infrastructure world, the solutions lifecycle selling motion, where having sold the original installation, very many of the additional expansion opportunities and the cross-sell upsell are driven by software. So we are working very hard to try and make sure that our partners themselves are not as exclusively dependent on the hardware and that volatility. But our portfolio. I have to say that I think that we have three significant infrastructure hardware relationships, and I think all of those vendors have worked incredibly hard with us because of our level of influence and their the mutual dependency both ways on making sure that we support the channel partners and give pricing stability as far as is possible.
Yeah, and that, and again, that's one of the other areas that I think gets a little bit taken for granted in an environment like we're in, because the relationships you have with your 3, 4, in this case, 3 or 4 major suppliers goes beyond just a, sort of a casual relationship, right? It goes beyond a line card kind of relationship. These are deep, long-standing relationships that you've had for a long, for years. That the discussions you're having early on help when we get in situations like this, right?
Yeah, and of course we've also seen some pull forward as well of opportunities. So all of those price increases have an accelerating opportunity as well as a price pressure one.
Yeah, absolutely. David, I remember my days in the channel on the vendor side as a vendor executive. When the allocation process started, it was nothing but painful. But I can tell you that when it did happen, we worked extraordinarily closely with our distributors to figure out how can we all get through this. And most of the fight, by the way, was internal, because there was this huge debate internally of whether the product was going to go direct to the large enterprise customers versus back into the channel, right? And that was always a challenge. So, well, look, David, we're wrapping up here. I guess the last question I have for you is really one that, I'd ask you to kind of look forward a little bit. And, from your perspective, as we look out, let's call it the next 3 years, because beyond that, it's probably impossible to get a sense for things. But as you look out the next 3 years or so, how do you see distribution continually evolving? And what do you think will happen that we'll look back on and say, we underestimated how significant that, the future role of distribution really has turned out to be? What in your sense, what do you think about that?
So, I think that the environment we're in at the moment, from a geopolitical uncertainty perspective, I'd like to think that will calm over the next few quarters. I don't think that will change governments and large organisations' view on data sovereignty. I think that the damage that's been done to global trust is significant. So I think that's one factor. However, what I do think is that the drives that we've talked about, the market opportunities, are not going to be short-lived. There may be, of course, some calming of the demand around the chipset price escalations, but the upgrade capability, or the upgrade requirement for infrastructure and networking as AI continues and as cybersecurity becomes a bigger threat, that is going to be a multi-year period of opportunity. I think the vendors, I think we're all seeing an element of price pressure from the vendors as they want to improve their own margins because their costs are going up. Yep. And they want to squeeze distribution. And I think that while I understand why they would take that view on large orders that they think perhaps the vendors are driving, they need to be careful that they don't try and squeeze distribution or see distribution as a fulfillment only vehicle, right, when their future growth is going to be dependent on continuing to train, evolve, develop the channel, deliver services, and drive the kind of solutions sales, lifecycle sales model that will require a lot of investment. What I do think that the successful distributors will do to maintain their capability is invest in AI themselves around productivity, so driving sales growth initiatives and capability. So I think there is more to be gained in distribution by finding ways of driving incremental sales than there is necessarily from cost reduction. I'm not saying there is no cost reduction opportunity, but I think it would be fair to say that given that all distributors are working on very, very tight margins, I think you will find that successful distribution organizations are already pretty lean in their infrastructure and their process capability. So I think what we might look to, or the vendors might look to, is we underestimated how quickly and how well distribution could invest in ways in driving incremental opportunity through the deployment of AI.
Interesting. Well, you, David, obviously you were around 6 years ago when I came in, and 27 years ago now, 2019. And it's incredible to me the progress distribution has made, right? We got through the pandemic, with flying colors in terms of the ability to support, and a lot of it was inventory, relationships with vendors, et cetera. But we got through that period, and now we're in this incredible period of services expansion, which is exactly what needs to be done. And hopefully the investments that have been made and will be made, and platforms is a big, you and I didn't spend a lot of time talking about this, but obviously you're referring to the platforms that have been put in place for both productivity gains and for incremental opportunity identification. The future looks bright. Now, you know, you and I have been doing this a long time, so we
Yeah.
want to be careful when we say that. But
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your time and certainly for what you're doing, and just congratulate you on the success
Okay.
that you guys continue to have. So,
No, thank you very much indeed. It's no, we have and continue to have a very positive journey at the moment, which we of course make only want to continue. We've got a tremendously strong team throughout our entire organisation, and I think that's something else that the partner community really values is the tenure and the experience of distribution executives. The vendor community generally has a much shorter or much faster turnover of executives in their key roles. And a lot of that movement, people we know, is a positive thing, but continuity and experience in distribution, and the fact, as you say, that every time and at every turn when the death knell of distribution is called out, actually it turns out that distribution rides that storm and comes up with ways to reinvent itself and add greater value to the channel is phenomenal.
yeah, it is. It is absolutely. Well, David, thanks again. This was terrific, and I look forward to talking to you again.